belong here?
She would swear. Look at what she's...
That moment she walked past them, they saw a maid. But history will record her as a billionaire who turned the tables. Comment your city and subscribe for more. Months straight. Every morning before the sun even rose over the city's skyline, she arrived before the household woke up, quietly slipping to the back service entrance, tie her apron, and stepping into the life of a woman that did not exist, the maid. She would kneel, damp cloth in hand, and slide across those cold surfaces like a ghost who didn't belong in a world of chandeliers and silent money. But in her heart, she repeated the same line she had whispered since the first day she took this job. Imagine owning this whole building and letting them call you the maid. Most people would call that insanity, but that was the point. Nobody suspected the truth. Nobody even imagined it, because the world was trained to look at uniforms, not owners, and Sarah deliberately chose to wear the uniform of invisibility. The kitchen clock chimed 6 a.m. The house was quiet, but it was never peaceful. Wealth in this house did not feel like elegance. It felt like surveillance. It felt like judgment. It felt like having to earn permission to exist. Sarah scrubbed the last streak of soap from the floor near the staircase with handrails made of imported teakwood from Turkey, and then she slowly rose to her feet, wiping her damp palms against the side of her faded cleaning trousers. Footsteps echoed above her, sharp, measured, impatient. Juan Ryger. Sarah didn't have to see her to know the woman had entered the hallway. The very air temperature changed around Juan, as if the house itself braced for impact. Juan was the kind of wealthy woman that believed her power existed in the way she stepped into a room, and how she never had to say please, and how she weaponized silence like a blade. She stood at the top of the staircase, silk robe tied loosely around her narrow waist, one hand resting on the banister, chin slightly raised as if she were perpetually smelling something rotten. Sarah bowed her head, not because she owed her respect, but because the character she was playing would. Juan exhaled dramatically, the kind of sigh meant to remind people she was tired of everyone beneath her. "You're late," she said flatly. Sarah did not argue the lie. She had arrived 30 minutes earlier than scheduled, but there was no point in correcting a woman who didn't want truth, only dominance. No excuses? One lifted a brow, amused by the silence. Sarah swallowed, her jaw tightening, but she forced her voice to stay gentle. "No, ma'am." One slowly descended the stairs, tapping one manicured fingernail against the rail every step, as if counting her superiority one click at a time. She reached the bottom, stopped 2 feet away from Sarah, and eyed her clothing with disdain. "That shirt," Juan's lip curled. "Charity shop?" Sarah kept her voice neutral. "I bought it myself." Juan chuckled, the kind of laugh that carried no joy. "Of course you did." Sarah didn't flinch. Not on her face. She simply lowered her eyes again, the performance of a woman who had been made small. But inside Sarah cataloged every sneer, every humiliation, every condescension. Because one day, very soon, every single breath of disrespect would be repaid, without her raising a voice, a hand, or even a word. Sarah continued dusting the antique vases as one walked away, leaving the bitter aftertaste of superiority floating in the air. She could hear Juan's voice drifting from the dining room, a voice that could be soft when Mark Ryger was near and venomous when he wasn't. Sarah had learned that pattern in the first week. Mark was different, not gentle, not kind, just absent. He walked through the mansion like an exhausted ghost who lived in spreadsheets instead of reality. He did not speak to Sarah. He did not acknowledge Sarah. The only time she ever heard his voice was when he was on the phone, boards, mergers, ROI, liquidation risk, the vocabulary of a man who believed emotions were liabilities. Sarah had been an asset, or so they thought. She smoothed the iron tablecloth, aligning the silverware exactly as one demanded. 5 inches from plate center, diagonally arranged forks with no smudge marks. Perfection wasn't appreciated. It was expected. Every millimeter of her work was measured, judged, criticized. One liked control, Mark liked order, and both believed that the maid was the lowest life form in the house. Sarah let them believe it. She fed that illusion daily because it protected her strategy. The humiliation was not pleasant, but it was tactical, because nobody ever watches the maid. Nobody questions the maid. Nobody imagines that the maid could buy their entire bloodline and not blink. Sarah didn't wear poverty. She wore camouflage. The Rygers thought they owned their world. What they didn't know was their world now sat secretly under Sarah's quiet control. They just hadn't discovered it yet. Ironically, in Sarah's presence, Mark Ryger never lifted his eyes higher than the surface of a document or the screen of his tablet. If she served him tea, he lifted the cup without ever acknowledging her hand. If she passed by with laundry, he turned away mid-conversation like her existence was visual noise. He thought ignoring her was power, but it was blindness, and blindness was the first step to being defeated. Sarah finished polishing the long corridor mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, calm, expressionless, but underneath the surface there was iron. She leaned closer to the glass and whispered, barely audible, the same line she told herself to stay focused. Imagine owning a whole building and letting them call you the maid. She straightened, smoothed her uniform, and walked toward the laundry wing, where she could be alone for 2 minutes. 2 minutes was enough to ground her, to breathe, to remind herself why she was here. This was not servitude. This was infiltration. Her wealth was silent. The kind of wealth that didn't need to be displayed because its power came from patience, leverage, timing. Sarah Howland didn't come to clean. She came to study. And the day would come when her signature, would blow open the truth that the maid was the most powerful person in the mansion. But not today. Today, she scrubbed. Today, she bowed her head. Today, she let them think they owned her. Because the sweetest revenge is the one that ripens quietly, unnoticed, until the moment the knife drops silently on a marble they once forced you to kneel on. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Comment your country, city, or state below. We love knowing how far our stories travel across the world. And if you're feeling this story already, hit subscribe to Billionaires Enclave. Your support keeps these powerful stories coming. The laundry room hummed softly with the spin cycle, but Sarah wasn't really in the mansion anymore. Her hands folded towels automatically, muscle memory, while her mind slipped backward into the place where this entire story was born. People assumed power was inherited. People assumed wealth was handed down through bloodline or marriage or legacy. Sarah Howland had clawed hers out of darkness, code line by code line, alone. One flashback unlocked another. Tiny room, one flickering bulb. Laptop too old to stay plugged in without overheating. Cold noodles for dinner. No mattress, just a faded blanket on the floor. That was her real origin. Not the marble stairs she scrubbed today. Not the perfume-scented corridors she mopped at dawn. Not this mansion full of people who believed they were royalty because someone, somewhere, once called her surname elite. Back then, Sarah had no luxury. She had no network. She had no inheritance. What she had was a cheap plastic desk, a dying laptop, and $4 billion ideas that nobody believed in. She could still hear the voices in her head, laughter, dismissals, rejections that tasted like rust. You think some little black girl from nothing can compete with Silicon Valley? Your pitch deck looks like you downloaded it off Google. Investors don't bet on females, especially not ones who wear supermarket sneakers. Tech is not for charity cases. Try hospitality instead. They didn't just reject her. They ridiculed the idea she even belonged in the room. She had sat there, stiff-backed in cheap plastic chairs in cold rented offices, while venture capitalists raised eyebrows like they were analyzing a joke. And after those meetings, she went home and coded through the night, not because she wanted glory, but because she refused to kneel forever. She told herself over and over, I'll build this thing, even if I die coding. In the present, Sarah picked up Mark Ryger's suit jacket and carried it toward the wardrobe room. Her face blank as stone, but inside, fire. Mark didn't know. One didn't know. Nobody knew that the apps they obsessed over, the tech platform their friends flexed about, the fintech valuation they bragged about over brunch, all of it was Sarah's. Not inspiration. Not concept help. Ownership. She built the first platform prototype alone. In that room, she built the automation systems. She built the user experience. And when nobody funded her, she launched quietly, bootstrapped, scaled using ghost accounts, used white-labeled shell companies to sign partnerships. She did the work of 50 software engineers without anybody knowing her name, because she didn't have the privilege of being seen. So she became invisible by choice, until invisibility became her most lethal weapon. There was a night she never forgot, the night the app crossed 3 million users. She sat alone at 3:14 a.m., wrists aching, eyes burning, palms sweating, and she whispered to the silence, "I built an empire in the shadows, and they still think I'm nobody." That line did not come from bitterness. It came from prophecy. And after that milestone, Sarah made a decision. If the world refused to see her value, she would weaponize it. She would become the ghost owner, the invisible shareholder, the silent kingmaker, the power nobody could trace until it was too late. She didn't want applause. She wanted leverage. Back in the Ryger mansion, Sarah placed Mark's jacket on the hanger and smoothed the fabric. She could feel his credit cards inside the pocket, heavy like tiny weapons rich people love to brandish. Mark Ryger had no idea that the startup he recently invested in, the one he bragged about to his friends, the one he said would become the next era of tech empire wealth, was actually her original platform. He didn't invest in innovation. He invested in Sarah and didn't even know it. He was a pawn in her board. So was Juan. So was every bank. So was every lawyer. Every acquisition Sarah made was done through 7 shell corporations, cross-registered across multiple jurisdictions, rebranding, reshuffling, erasing paper trails. 52%. It didn't happen overnight. It happened one silent signature at a time. She was a majority shareholder, not just in one company, but in 3 tech infrastructures that ran under the financial skeleton of the region. Mark didn't own wealth. Mark was riding on wealth built by a woman. He refused to look in the eye. That irony was delicious, but it was not emotional to Sarah. It was strategic, because Sarah never wanted them to know she was rich. Not until they were already ruined. She closed a wardrobe and whispered to herself. Not bravado, not ego, just factual truth. I built the empire they worship, and they still think I'm nobody. Her voice cracked at the end, because even victory carries pain if you had to earn it alone. On her lunch break, Sarah sat in the servant quarters, scrolling silently through secure dashboards, the kind only founders and top-level board holders were meant to access. Market growth projections, investor reports, quarterly returns, dividends funneling into shell trust accounts. 6 figures, daily automatic. She took a slow breath and locked her phone. Soon, one signature would reveal everything. Not yet. Timing was the last currency. She needed the perfect. Power is not loud. Power is patient. Power is quiet. And Sarah Howen had spent years learning that silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. Because when a woman is underestimated, she becomes invisible. And invisible hands move the world. As we move further, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from right now? City/state/country. Drop it below. And if you're invested in this story already, hit subscribe to the Billionaires Enclave YouTube channel so you never miss. Dinner parties in the Ryger mansion were less about food and more about theater, and Sarah Howen played the silent character they all believed had no lines. A chandelier dripped diamonds above a 20-foot table. Jazz piano laced the air like velvet, and every seat was warmed by men and women who believed wealth gave them the authority to decide who mattered in the world. Sarah stood behind Juan's chair with the soft stillness of someone trained to erase their own presence. Her hands held a bottle of sparkling water. Her eyes stared straight ahead, never down, never up, exactly the way luxury homes expect staff to exist, like shadows with pulse. The guests laughed, crystal glasses clinking, perfumes fighting for dominance in the air. One turned her head just slightly toward Sarah, then spoke loudly enough for every ear at the table. "Sarah, next time, please iron your blouse properly. Wrinkles make the house look like we hired from the street." A chorus of soft smirks followed. One woman murmured, "These agencies don't screen well anymore." Sarah didn't flinch, not because she didn't feel it, but because she didn't waste reactions on people beneath her intellect. Her silence was not submission. Her silence was storage, a place where she deposited every humiliation like bullets in a locked drawer, waiting. One wasn't finished. She never was. Also, she added with a false smile, don't stand behind me when I'm talking to guests. Your shadow shows up in the dinner photos. And our photographer has a very expensive camera. It highlights things. Everyone at the table understood the unsaid word. Black, not just skin. Black is a problem. Black is a blemish on their curated luxury aesthetics. Sarah's wrist tightened around the glass bottle, but her voice, when she spoke, sounded like silk pulled across stone. Yes, ma'am. The room exhaled in satisfaction. They liked obedience. They needed obedience. They fetishized obedience. And Sarah had learned something long ago in her cheap apartment with the flickering bulb. Your enemies always relax when they think they've broken you. Later that night, when dinner ended, Mark loosened his tie and stepped outside onto the marble balcony, cigarette in hand, whiskey in the other. Sarah was clearing the empty glasses. He stared out over the estate, silhouetted by gold garden lights, and spoke without looking at her. You know what's tragic? She didn't reply. He didn't wait for permission. It's not the economy. It's not global recession. It's not interest rates. No, it's the optics. The way he said optics made it sound like a moral compass, not a strategy. Mark sipped his drink, chuckled, then leaned his elbow on the railing. You want the truth? Blackstaff makes the brand look cheap. There it was. Not even disguised. Not even softened. Just blunt racism delivered like a business statistic. He continued, as if giving a lecture to a student. When investors walk inside a house like this, they should see Scandinavian minimalism, old money whiteness, European curation, not cultural contrast. His tone dipped lower, like he was speaking about a marketing flaw, not a human being standing right behind him. Sarah wiped a wine glass. Slow, measured. She didn't defend. She didn't react. She stored. Every insult, every syllable, every drop of superiority. She archived. Because someday, when the reveal came, every one of these sentences would become a detonator. Mark tapped ashes into a crystal tray. It's not personal. It's branding. Sarah wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because Mark genuinely believed his prejudice was business logic. She whispered, barely audible, of course, branding. He walked away satisfied, like he just educated her, like he just taught her how the world works. Mark never realized he was lecturing the woman who owned the very digital infrastructure that powered two of his company's biggest revenue funnels. He was lecturing his landlord. He was lecturing the chairwoman behind the curtain. He was lecturing the ghost who could erase his surname from paperwork with one signature. Sarah finished cleaning at 1:14 a.m. She sat alone in the servant pantry, pale fluorescent light buzzing overhead, and pulled out her phone. Not a social phone, not a personal phone, the encrypted phone, her real phone, the one linked to all shell acquisitions, the one no one in this house even knew existed. She opened her portfolio dashboards, silent digital dominion glowing in her palm. Her net position updated. Growth in Asia. Acquisitions in stealth. An algorithm update pushing adoption. The numbers pulse like heartbeat monitors. 52.4%. Majority control. Not just shares. Governance. And the most powerful part? Nobody knew. Not Mark. Not Juan. Not the house guests. They thought they were insulting a maid. They were insulting the woman who could make one phone call that would collapse their business like a lung full of smoke. Sarah slid the phone back into her pocket. Every humiliation was not pain. It was fuel. It was leverage and reserve. She didn't cry. She didn't crumble. She whispered to herself, calm, lethal, one day they will choke on these words. Then she stood up, turned off the pantry light, and walked back into the mansion's darkness, like a queen who had already decided the exact date of execution. Tell us where you're watching from. City? Country? Drop it in the comments. And if you're locked into the story already, hit subscribe to Billionaires Enclave. The laundry room was the only place in that mansion where the chaos of the world never intruded. No guests, no wine splashes, no laughter meant to cut flesh. Just bleach, detergent, white walls, metal shelves, and the steady mechanical hum of the industrial dryer vibrating through the tiles like a heartbeat she didn't own. Sarah Howen closed the door slowly behind her, turned the bolt, and leaned her back against it. For a moment, she was afraid it couldn't hold the weight of her exhaustion. The marble floors outside were cruel, echoed with entitlement. But in here, surrounded by soiled uniforms and bleached fumes, she could disappear into the shadow of her own invisibility. The rag she held in her hand, still damp from wiping Juan's spilled wine, fell onto the tile near her shoes. She didn't pick it up. Her knees trembled under her, and she slid downward until she was sitting on the cold floor, knees to chest, arms around herself like a woman bracing against collision impact. She wasn't crying yet. She was still holding the tears hostage behind clenched jaw muscles and the raw discipline of someone who had swallowed pain for decades. Finally, she inhaled sharply. The smell of bleach burned her throat. And then it broke. Tears streamed silently at first. No sobs, just water that refused to be contained. Quiet tears, the most dangerous kind. The kind women cry when the world believes they feel nothing. Her head lowered until her forehead nearly touched her knees. Her chest shook once, twice, and then the sob escaped. A small sound, so fragile it should have shattered against the washing machine door. She whispered, not to the room, but to herself. Maybe greatness is useless if nobody sees it. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she covered her mouth as if she'd just confessed a crime. This wasn't about Juan's insults anymore, or Mark's casual racism, or the cocktail party humiliation of being treated like a stain that never disappears no matter how much bleach you pour on it. This was about the truth. She had spent years collecting shares, building tech undershell structures, funding an empire from behind 7 LLCs. Yet here she was, on her knees, scrubbing floors like a ghost servant in a palace she secretly owned. And no one knew. No one respect you for a crown they can't see. She lifted her hand to wipe the tears, but her fingertips slipped on her wet cheeks, and she laughed, bitter, broken. She had built the empire they worshipped. She had coded the back-end architecture in tiny rented rooms while she ate ramen and slept sitting up. She had negotiated investment rounds while her clothes were hanging over borrowed radiator heat. She had eaten humiliation for dessert her entire 20s. And now this invisible, like a shadow wearing an apron. She looked up at the fluorescent light above her. It buzzed softly, flickered, then steadied. The flicker made something feel symbolic, like a message from the universe, like a blink, a recalibration. Her tears slowed, her breathing shifted, and then her eyes changed. Pain drained from her expression slowly, and another emotion took its place. A colder one, a sharper one. Resolve. Not revenge yet, just the first spark. She leaned forward, wiped her eyes clean, and laid her hand on the cold tile like she was grounding herself. She took a deep breath, exhaled, and something inside her clicked. Not a cracking, a locking, a decision. No more hiding behind dust rags. No more swallowing venom like communion wine. No more letting the wealthy dictate who was worth being seen. Sarah slowly stood up, her movement steadier, her posture rising into itself like a woman remembering her core. She wiped the moisture from her chin, moved to the small metal table, and picked up the folded laundry shirt she had been working on before the breakdown. And she folded it with precision, slow, clean, controlled, the way CEOs fold power. The tears dried, the shoulders realigned, the breath evened. Something ancient in her, something that had built companies from nothing but hunger, returned to its throne inside her body. She whispered, not weak this time, but steady, I built this empire. I built their wealth. I built the foundation they walk on. Her voice was almost calm. And I'm done being their ghost. She folded another shirt. They forgot who owns this place. Another. I didn't. She walked to the small metal locker where she kept her things, reached inside, and pulled out a small USB key. Matte black, unmarked, the kind of object people ignore because it looks unimportant. It contained everything. her ownership structure, the proxy votes she had secured, the board leverage, the silent power. She held in her palm for several seconds, staring at it like a weapon. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow she would start breathing like the majority owner she already technically was. Tomorrow she would make the world remember that the woman on her knees had been a queen folding her crown underneath an apron. She slipped the USB into her pocket, exhaled, and looked at her reflection in the chrome of the dryer door. The reflection was distorted, stretched, but in her eyes she saw clarity. She wasn't crying anymore. She wasn't breaking anymore. She was beginning. And as she opened the laundry room door, stepping back toward the marble corridors that once swallowed her dignity, the expression on her face was no longer sorrow. It was strategy. It was a first step of war. She closed the door behind her gently, smoothed her uniform, lifted her chin, and whispered to the empty hallway, "They will not see me coming." And she smiled. Night settled over the Ryger estate like a velvet coffin. The mansion was quiet, not peaceful quiet, predator quiet. The kind of silence where the walls know a crime is about to be committed. Sarah Howland stood alone in the dark kitchen. Lights off, palms pressed flat against the cold marble island. She stared at her reflection in the glass, eyes swollen from crying, but now they weren't filled with pain. They were filled with calculation. The humiliation was over. Tonight, the blade turns. Her breathing slowed. Her pulse steadied. One by one, her emotions shut down, like switches in a server room going dark. Not weakness. Prep mode. Sarah whispered. No audience. No cameras. Just her voice dissolving into the cold stainless steel. They broke something inside me and didn't know they just unlocked the vault. She took out her phone, hand steady now, and dialed James Fred. It didn't even ring twice. He answered like he'd been sitting in darkness, waiting for this very second. James Fred, calm, surgical. "Sarah, are you ready?" Sarah's voice was flat, not tired, weaponized. "Sarah, I'm done hiding." There was a silence on the line, not hesitation, confirmation. James exhaled slowly, like a chess master finally hearing his queen say, "Go." "If you sign tonight, you become a controlling voice on every board seat that ever mocked you." Sarah closed her eyes. She saw Juan sneer, the wine spilling accidentally onto her blouse earlier, the laughter, the way she laughed only because if she didn't laugh she would have screamed. She saw Mark pretending she was invisible because his ego couldn't process a black woman not being beneath him. She swallowed. "Sarah, bring me the documents." James, "You understand once we do this, we don't stop. We don't reverse. We cut the artery and watch them bleed out." Sarah didn't blink. "Sarah, they already spilled my blood first." She ended the call and slipped the phone into her apron. No shaking. No trembling. The crying girl in the laundry room had died 20 minutes ago. This was rebirth. She walked through the empty hallway, the marble she scrubbed daily, the marble they walked on like they owned. But tonight, these floors belonged to her in silence. She passed the dining room, long polished table, golden candle holders, untouched like some museum of old money's arrogance. She paused and whispered, soft but lethal, "One signature, and I own your oxygen." She walked outside onto the terrace, cold wind brushing against her face, and leaned on the railing. From up here you could see the entire estate. Every light they thought they bought, every corner they believed was theirs. In reality, every brick was built with the revenue of the software she wrote at age 19. She had phantom-coded her own empire. They just didn't know the phantom was standing with a mop in their hallway. Suddenly, headlights approached at the gate. A black sedan. Quiet. Discreet. No logo. James Fred. He stepped out, tall, precise, sharp suit, not flashy, strategic. He walked toward her, briefcase in hand, and paused right in front of her like a surgeon meeting a patient about to enter a dangerous operation. "James." "Sarah, this is the moment." She took the pen from his hand, but didn't sign yet. She wanted to feel the gravity. The pen trembled between forefinger and thumb, not from fear, but adrenaline. James placed the contract on the table between them, wine flipping the pages slightly. like fate itself was impatient. James, this signature transfers controlling rights of all 52% Shell holdings back to your personal name. Sarah exhaled. 52%, more than any Ryger ever had. More than Mark. More than Juan. More than all of them combined. She smiled very slightly. Sarah, they always call me the Maid. James leaned in, tone low, nearly a whisper. James. And tomorrow they will call you owner. Sarah looked up toward the mansion. In the top window, she saw Juan's shadow cross the curtain. Juan Ryger's empire wife. The one who mocked her clothes. The one who forced her to eat in the pantry. The one who laughed at her skin as if melanin meant poverty. Sarah pressed a pen to the paper and whispered to herself, "This is for every black woman they ever tried to erase." And with one continuous stroke, she signed, her name inked across the page like a blade slicing a throat. No hesitation. James closed the file, slow, almost reverent, like closing the lid on a coffin. James, it's done. They just lost everything. They just don't know it yet. Sarah looked up at the sky. Night air cold, sharp, and her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 10,000 unspoken nights. Sarah, tomorrow we don't serve. James nodded, a hint of pride in his gaze. James, tomorrow we watch them kneel. Sarah turned back toward the house, eyes glowing like steel under moonlight, and whispered to the darkness. They thought I was beneath them, but I was always under them, holding the detonator. Morning sunlight poured into the breakfast lounge like wealth itself. Golden, thick, arrogant. Juan Ryger sat at the head of the 6-seat Italian marble dining table, stirring her imported French coffee like she was mixing poison. Sarah Howen stood quietly at the side, apron on, hair tied, face expressionless, her maid posture still switched on though she no longer needed it. And today, Juan was fidgeting. Today, Juan sensed something she couldn't explain. Women like Juan can smell when power shifts, even if they don't know how or why or where the axis moved. It's instinct. Old money senses when the ground under the marble isn't stable anymore. Juan finally placed a spoon down and looked up at Sarah like a woman preparing to flirt with cruelty. Juan, condescending, smooth. Sarah, dear, you've been, what's the word, useful. Sarah didn't respond. She simply looked at her. Calm, almost serene. Narration, faceless, low. Arrogance always tries to negotiate with a person it's already destroyed. Juan leaned back, crossing her legs with perfect theatrical posture. That signature CEO wife pose meant to trigger intimidation. Juan, my husband and I have been discussing optics, and frankly, we've decided the state needs a different aesthetic direction. Sarah blinked once. Sarah, flat, you mean a different Maid. Juan smirked, that cruel, bored, emotionless smirk, the kind that rich people use when they fire someone they think is beneath them. Juan, exactly, but I am gracious. I don't like ending things on ugly terms, so I have decided to offer you a retirement package. She slid an envelope across the table, like it was meant to stun her. Sarah didn't touch it. Juan cocked her head slightly, irritated that Sarah didn't reach for the bait. Juan, sarcastic sweetness. Don't stare at it like you don't know what money looks like. Sarah just watched her, silence like an executioner sharpening a blade. Juan sighed, annoyed. Juan, it's $50,000. Pause. Juan waited for shock, but there was none. Sarah finally reached out, opened the envelope, and stared for 1 second, not impressed, just evaluating, like she was looking at a grocery receipt. Juan whispered, sharp, you people are never satisfied. Sarah finally looked her dead in the eyes, and this time her voice was carved in glacier ice. Sarah, you have no idea how satisfied I already am. Silence. Juan froze. She didn't understand the tone, but she felt it. Power, not defiance. Power. Sarah gently placed the envelope back on the table, like returning a drink she didn't order. Sarah, calm, surgical. I don't need your money. Juan scoffed, trying to recover her dominance. Juan, you don't need it? Darling, without this house, without this job, you'd be scrubbing motel bathrooms. Sarah smiled slightly, Not cruel, not arrogant, but the smile of someone who already won the war and doesn't need to brag about it. Sarah, oh, Juan, you truly have no idea who is scrubbing who. Juan's eyes narrowed. The words confused her. They didn't fit the hierarchy she believed existed. Narration. Rich people never notice when the power dynamic has changed until they feel the floor collapse under their feet. Mark Ryger, the husband, walked in at that exact moment. Clueless, sleepy, half-buttoned shirt. He poured orange juice like a man who never had to live on survival mode a single day in his life. He didn't even look at Sarah. He didn't know the earthquake had already been triggered. He didn't know the woman he kept ignoring now on the bed frame he slept in, the company car outside, the very stock portfolio his last Wall Street interview bragged about. He sat down next to Juan. Mark, disgusted sigh. Still here? Sarah didn't look at him. She just moved to wipe a small stain on the table. Ritual habit. But this time, every move she made was deliberate. She wanted to fully remember this moment. The last morning she would ever serve them. Juan placed a manicured hand over her husband's wrist. A toxic show of dominance, couple synergy. Juan, she's leaving. We're compensating her. I offered a very generous severance. Mark didn't hide his approval. He nodded like someone approving trash removal. Mark, good. The optics were starting to bother me. Investors notice who walks through your hallways. Sarah put down the cleaning cloth. Slow, precise, almost ceremonial. Then she spoke, voice so calm that it chilled the air around all three of them. Sarah, Juan, Mark, I want you both to remember this breakfast. Mark turned, finally, genuinely confused. Mark, remember it? Why? Sarah stepped closer, not threatening, just present, like a storm cloud entering a room. Sarah, soft, because this is the last day you will ever speak to me from above. They stared at her, like she had spoken in another language. She gently placed her apron on the chair, perfectly folded, symbolically ending the role she played for their comfort. Narration, low, crisp. Some revolutions don't start with gunfire. They start with silence. Sarah turned toward the door, not rushing, not emotional, just walking like a woman with written future. Right before exiting the dining room, she paused, head slightly tilted to the side, not looking back, just letting the tension drip like poison off her final line. Sarah, don't worry, by tonight you'll understand. She walked away. Juan scrambled for control. Juan shouting, what is that supposed to mean? Sarah didn't turn, didn't answer, just let the click of her shoes echo through the hallway like drumbeats of an incoming takeover. Morning sunlight poured into the breakfast lounge like wealth itself. Golden, thick, arrogant. Juan Ryger sat at the head of the 6-seat Italian marble dining table, stirring her imported French coffee like she was mixing poison. Sarah Howen stood quietly at the side, apron on, hair tied, face expressionless, her maid posture still switched on though she no longer needed it. And today, Juan was fidgeting. Today, Juan sensed something she couldn't explain. Women like Juan can smell when power shifts, even if they don't know how or why or where the axis moved. It's instinct. Old money senses when the ground under the marble isn't stable anymore. Juan finally placed a spoon down and looked up at Sarah like a woman preparing to flirt with cruelty. Juan, condescending, smooth. Sarah, dear, you've been, what's the word, useful? Sarah didn't respond. She simply looked at her. Calm, almost serene. Narration, faceless, low. Arrogance always tries to negotiate with a person it's already destroyed. Juan leaned back, crossing her legs with perfect theatrical posture. That signature CEO wife pose meant to trigger intimidation. Juan, my husband and I have been discussing optics, and frankly, we've decided the state needs a different aesthetic direction. Sarah blinked once. Sarah, flat, you mean a different Maid. Juan smirked, that cruel, bored, emotionless smirk, the kind that rich people use when they fire someone they think is beneath them. Juan, exactly, but I am gracious. I don't like ending things on ugly terms, so I have decided to offer you a retirement package. She slid an envelope across the table, like it was meant to stun her. Sarah didn't touch it. Juan cocked her head slightly, irritated that Sarah didn't reach for the bait. Juan, sarcastic sweetness. Don't stare at it like you don't know what money looks like. Sarah just watched her, silence like an executioner sharpening a blade. Juan sighed, annoyed. Juan, it's $50,000. Pause. Juan waited for shock, but there was none. Sarah finally reached out, opened the envelope, and stared for 1 second. Not impressed, just evaluating, like she was looking at a grocery receipt. Juan whispered, sharp, "You people are never satisfied." Sarah finally looked her dead in the eyes, and this time her voice was carved in glacier ice. "Sarah, you have no idea how satisfied I already am." Silence. Juan froze. She didn't understand the tone, but she felt it. Power, not defiance. Power. Sarah gently placed the envelope back on the table, like returning a drink she didn't order. Sarah, calm, surgical. "I don't need your money." Juan scoffed, trying to recover her dominance. "Juan, you don't need it? Darling, without this house, without this job, you'd be scrubbing motel bathrooms." Sarah smiled slightly, not cruel, not arrogant, but the smile of someone who already won the war and doesn't need to brag about it. Sarah, "Oh, Juan, you truly have no idea who is scrubbing who." Juan's eyes narrowed. The words confused her. They didn't fit the hierarchy she believed existed. Narration. Rich people never notice when the power dynamic has changed until they feel the floor collapse under their feet. Mark Ryger, the husband, walked in at that exact moment. Clueless, sleepy, half-buttoned shirt. He poured orange juice like a man who never had to live on survival mode a single day in his life. He didn't even look at Sarah. He didn't know the earthquake had already been triggered. He didn't know the woman he kept ignoring now on the bed frame he slept in, the company car outside, the very stock portfolio his last Wall Street interview bragged about. He sat down next to Juan. Mark, disgusted sigh. "Still here?" Sarah didn't look at him. She just moved to wipe a small stain on the table. Ritual habit. But this time, every move she made was deliberate. She wanted to fully remember this moment, the last morning she would ever serve them. Juan placed a manicured hand over her husband's wrist. A toxic show of dominance, couple synergy. "Juan, she's leaving. We're compensating her. I offered a very generous severance." Mark didn't hide his approval. He nodded like someone approving trash removal. "Mark, good. The optics were starting to bother me. Investors notice who walks through your hallways." Sarah put down the cleaning cloth. Slow, precise, almost ceremonial. Then she spoke, voice so calm that it chilled the air around all three of them. "Sarah, Juan, Mark, I want you both to remember this breakfast." Mark turned, finally, genuinely confused. "Mark, remember it? Why?" Sarah stepped closer, not threatening, just present, like a storm cloud entering a room. "Sarah," soft, "because this is the last day you will ever speak to me from above." They stared at her, like she had spoken in another language. She gently placed her apron on the chair, perfectly folded, symbolically ending the role she played for their comfort. Narration, low, crisp. Some revolutions don't start with gunfire. They start with silence. Sarah turned toward the door, not rushing, not emotional, just walking like a woman with a written future. Right before exiting the dining room, she paused, head slightly tilted to the side, not looking back, just letting the tension drip like poison off her final line. "Sarah, don't worry, by tonight you'll understand." She walked away. Juan scrambled for control. Juan shouting, "What is that supposed to mean?" Sarah didn't turn, didn't answer, just let the click of her shoes echo through the hallway like drumbeats of an incoming takeover. Rain hammered against the glass facade of Ryger Global Headquarters like 1,000 paparazzi flashes. Outside, the plaza was chaos. Reporters elbowing each other for a spot near the velvet rope, lights burning through the mist. Every major network from New York to Nairobi had their cameras pointed at one small podium, one woman, Sarah Howen, no longer in her maid's uniform. No apron, no gloves, just a tailored black suit, crisp, commanding, her posture carved out of purpose. Her curls brushed her shoulders like a crown. She looked untouchable. But her eyes held 12 years of humiliation, polished into vengeance. The world had come to watch a scandal. They didn't realize they were witnessing an execution. Reporter number 1, shouting, "Sarah, is it true you were working as a maid while owning controlling shares of Ryger Global?" Reporter number 2, yelling over the crowd, "Did the Rygers know you were their boss? Or was this revenge?" The questions rained down like bullets. Sarah gripped the podium. The microphone picked up the faint tremor in her breath. She looked over the sea of faces. Strangers holding up their phones, her reflection flashing in every lens. Then she began. Sarah, voice steady, cold, "They call me the maid, but I was their architect." The crowd hushed instantly. She paused, scanning the horizon. The skyscrapers her code had financed. The company her mind had built while her hands scrubbed marble floors. Sarah, continuing, "I designed their fortune from a one-room apartment. I coded their platform when they didn't believe a black woman could build anything worth buying. And when they stole my credit, when they branded me help instead of human, I decided to let them choke on the silence they created." Cameras flashed, capturing every word. Behind her, the Rygers lawyer stood pale as chalk, clutching a folder marked "Emergency Restructure." One Ryger hadn't shown up. Mark was watching from somewhere, humiliated, drowning in headlines. "Sarah, calmer now, let me be clear. I didn't hide because I was ashamed. I hid because power grows best in the dark." Gasps rippled through the audience. She tapped the podium once, a subtle echo of a gavel. Then she dropped the numbers. "Sarah, unblinking, as of this morning, Ryger Global's valuation has climbed 12%. Investors didn't flee when they saw a black woman in control. They called it the smartest pivot in the company's history." The screens behind her flashed, live stock tickers, green arrows soaring upward, the sound effect of success, ding, ding, ding. Each tone sliced through the memory of her humiliation. Sarah, voice soft, trembling, "I wiped their tears with the same hands they slapped. I cleaned their messes, including the ones they made of my soul. But today," she looked up, her reflection mirrored in the skyscraper glass. "Sarah, today the mess is them." The reporters went silent. Even the rain slowed, as if the city itself paused to listen. A tremor of applause started, uncertain at first, then spread like wildfire. But Sarah didn't smile. Not yet. She glanced toward the front row, Mama Rue, the woman who'd raised her when her parents died. Mama Rue's eyes glistened with tears, whispering a silent amen. Sarah took one last deep breath, the kind of breath you take before forgiving the world or burning it down. "Sarah, you want the truth? I didn't just survive. I invested in my pain, and it paid dividends." Reporters scribbled wildly. She leaned closer to the mic, her tone darkening. "Sarah, for years I worked for people who believe money made them gods. But money without mercy is just a mirror for rot. So here's what happens next." She lifted a file from the podium and opened it. Her next words detonated like grenades. "Sarah, reading effective immediately, the Ryger family is relieved of all board responsibilities. Their assets will be liquidated to pay off outstanding labor settlements, harassment suits, and fraudulent expense accounts. Oh, and the mansion where I used to mop floors." She looked up, fire flickering in her tone. "Sarah, it'll be turned into a scholarship home for women who were told they'd never belong." The crowd erupted. Applause. Shouts. Camera shutters snapping like lightning. She didn't flinch. She wasn't performing. She was testifying. Reporter number 3, calling out, "Ms. Howen, what do you say to people calling you ruthless?" She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides a wound stitched with diamonds. "Sarah, ruthless? No, I'm awake. And sometimes awakening looks like destruction to those still sleeping." A beat of silence followed. Then she leaned forward again, her voice lower now, intimate, like speaking to one viewer behind a screen. "Sarah, whisper, for every woman who's been underestimated, for every black girl told to stay in her place. Remember, I didn't climb the ladder. I bought it. The wind caught her hair. Flashes painted her face gold. Behind her, the stock price soared again, as if the market itself knelt before her resolve. She stepped back from the mic. The camera zoomed in, capturing the glint in her eyes as her whisper became a war cry. Sarah, $8.4 billion. That's what my silence was worth. The crowd gasped. Reporters leaned in like addicts to a secret. But no amount of gold will ever shine brighter than freedom. Later that night, the plaza is empty now. Rain still falls, soft, cleansing. Sarah stands alone at the edge of the steps, looking up at the Ryger Global sign. Her reflection gleams faintly against the glass letters. The Maid turned mogul, framed by the glow of her own empire. James Fred walks up quietly beside her, umbrella in hand. James. Quietly, you realize you just declared war on the entire upper class, right? Sarah doesn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the skyline. Sarah, soft, reflective, no. I just reminded them who built the ground they walk on. He smirks, then silence, except the rhythmic tapping of rain on marble. James, half grin, what now, Miss Howen? Sarah turns, eyes gleaming under city lights. Sarah, now? We clean the world. She walks off, her footsteps echoing over the marble plaza like prophecy. Cut to a wide drone shot. City skyline glowed beneath storm clouds, and her voice overlays cold, final, and unforgettable. Sarah, narration, I was the maid. I became the storm. And when I was done, only truth remained. If this story shattered your expectations, hit subscribe right now. Comment where you're watching from. Tell us how Sarah's story made you feel. And stay tuned for the next chapter, because revenge isn't over until mercy walks in. You're watching Billionaires Enclave, where power always has a heartbeat. The sky outside the Ryger corporate tower was an ugly gray, not the gentle kind that preceded rain, but the solid, suffocating kind that felt like a warning, like the universe itself was holding breath. The kind of sky that appeared when justice finally comes wearing heels. Inside the boardroom, the air was even heavier. Juan Ryger and her husband Mark knelt on the marble floor that Sarah Howen had cleaned for years. Only this time, she had arrived not with bleaching gloves, but with power. Juan's mascara was ruined, black streaks running down her face in crooked rivers. Mark's tie was twisted, and his breath came in sharp bursts. They were both trembling, not from cold, but from recognition. They finally understood who Sarah was. Not the help. Not the maid. Not the black girl in uniform. She was the one holding the keys. The one holding the future. The one holding their lives. Sarah stood before them, now in a tailored black suit, hair pulled back. No apron, no gloves, no humiliation. Just presence. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to spit insults. She didn't need to show anger. Silence was enough, because her silence now meant power, not shame. The only sound in the room was a distant clicking of cameras from a hallway, reporters swarming, desperate to capture the final blow, the shocking twist, the billionaire reveal, the story that would break the internet in the next 10 minutes. Juan's voice cracked first. She tried to speak, but the words came out disassembled. Sarah, please, please. We didn't know. Sarah blinked slowly. Still no reaction. Still no emotion. Juan swallowed hard. We were cruel. We judged you. We disrespected you. But you have to understand that's how the world works. This system, it conditions us. And we were just... Sarah raised one finger. Juan instantly shut up. Sarah didn't yell. She didn't curse. She simply spoke. Her voice was calm. Even. Razor clean. Juan, she said softly, the world does not condition cruelty. People choose cruelty. You chose it freely. Juan broke into another sob. Mark, who rarely ever spoke to Sarah directly, finally found his voice. His words came out low. Fragile. Desperate. Sarah, we need this company. Our family, our children. Sarah cut him off gently. Your children will be fine, she said. This is not about destroying your bloodline. Mark looked confused, hopeful, unsure. What do you mean? He whispered. Sarah walked toward the window, slow, graceful steps, looking out across the skyline of city she once thought she'd never own a part of. Revenge is easy, Sarah said. Very easy. Too easy. Silence. You humiliated me, she continued. You mocked my skin, my uniform, my existence. She turned slightly, just enough to look at them, but the truth is, I don't need to destroy you to prove I won. Mark bowed his head. One looked up, terrified, yet searching for hope. Sarah sat in one of the executive chairs, the same chair she used to dust while knowing her net worth could buy the building 5 times. She placed both hands on the table. For every night I worked in your home, she said quietly, I built another company. For every insult you flung at my skin, I acquired another percentage of stock. For every glass of wine you spilled on me, I added another line to my silent takeover. Mark's lips trembled. Sarah, what do you want from us? Sarah leaned forward slightly. Nothing, she said. They both froze. No firing. No exile. No spotlight humiliation, she said. All of that would be too cheap. Juan's breathing sped up. She didn't trust this. Sarah continued. You will keep working. Both of you. But now you will work under me. Mark's eyes widened. You mean? Yes, Sarah said. You will report to me daily. You will keep your positions publicly, because your shame will serve a greater lesson. Juan swallowed. That lesson is what? She whispered. Sarah smiled softly. Not a smirk, not arrogance, just clarity. That humility is not optional, Sarah said. It is mandatory. Silence pressed over the room. Sarah stood and walked over to Juan, who flinched instinctively. But Sarah didn't strike. She didn't spit. She didn't degrade. She simply handed Juan a small white envelope. Juan slowly opened it, hands trembling, expecting a termination order or eviction. Inside was a new employment contract. Same salaries, same titles, but a new signature line. Under CEO and majority owner was printed, Sarah Howen 52% controlling interest. Juan looked up, tears drowning her words. You mean we still have jobs? Sarah nodded once. Yes, because mercy is power. Revenge is impulse. Juan closed her eyes and wept harder than she ever had in her life. Mark slowly knelt forward, head down, not kissing her feet like a servant, but bowing like a soldier acknowledging his new commander. And Sarah finally exhaled softly, not from relief, but from release. She had won, not by bloodshed, not by screaming, but by rewriting the hierarchy, by reversing the mirror, by proving that the most powerful form of victory is restraint. Sarah whispered, just loud enough for them to hear, use the second chance wisely. If you waste it, there will not be a third. Sarah turned toward the exit. Security held the door open, no longer for the maid, but for the queen. She walked out, cameras flashing, reporters shouting her name, microphones stretching toward her like hungry animals. She paused just 1 second, looked directly into a camera lens, and gave the world the line that would become the quote of the decade. They called me the maid, but I was the architect. Flashbulbs exploded. History captured. Power claimed. Mercy delivered. If you're still watching, tell us in the comments where you're watching from right now. What city, what country? And don't forget to subscribe to Billionaires Enclave. After the boardroom bloodshed and the global press frenzy, the world didn't go quiet. It woke up. For weeks, every social feed, every financial newspaper, every trending Twitter space was wrestling with one headline. Black Maid secretly owned the company and took control live on camera. The shock wasn't just that Sarah Howen had taken over Ryger Holdings. It was how quietly she had done it. No scandal, no leaked photos, no sponsorship, no billionaire romance angle. Just raw mind, raw discipline, raw patient strategy. Silence had become her most terrifying weapon. And now, with the whole world watching, Sarah had one final move left. Not revenge, not humiliation, not spectacle. A legacy. It started with a single press release on a cold Thursday morning. No fancy graphics. No corporate PR spin. Just a title. The Howin Foundation for Invisible Women. And beneath it, one line in Sarah's own voice. Silent women are never weak. They're just gathering power. The floodgates exploded. News stations across the world requested interviews. Government bodies wanted partnerships. Philanthropists tried to attach their names. But Sarah turned down almost every request. She wasn't building a public charity to flaunt benevolence. She wasn't doing a PR tour. She was building a weapon, a structure for women like the woman she used to be, women who scrubbed floors in silence, women who were mocked for their skin, women who worked twice as hard just to be called average, women who were disrespected because they refused to bow correctly, women who were invisible. And she built it quietly. No announcement of how many millions she funded it with. No camera crews touring facilities. No gala events with celebrities attending in red gowns pretending to care. The Howin Foundation was built in reverse, not to impress rich people, but to free poor ones. Inside the mansion where she used to polish floors, now converted into a corporate retreat training facility, Sarah sat at her desk, the same desk one once told her never to touch. She opened her notebook, the same notebook where she had once scribbled startup code in a darkroom, and she wrote 3 categories. Education, equity, escape. This was the Howin model. Education, funding skills for invisible women to build something of their own. Equity, not loans, not debt traps, actual equity stakes. Escape, legal support for the women trapped in economic cages and abusive work hierarchies. No savior mentality, only empowerment. Sarah placed her pen down and whispered into the empty room. Greatness means nothing if you don't hand someone else a key. And she meant every word. The press eventually got wind of the mission, and when they asked, "So, Sarah, why didn't you destroy Mark and Juan?" She smiled softly, never arrogant, always surgical. "Because the world doesn't need more destruction," she answered. "It needs restructuring." That quote went viral, even more than her boardroom reveal. Young women printed it on notebooks. Single mothers wrote it on fridge magnets. Overworked employees clipped it to their cubicle walls. Because everyone understood the subtext. Justice is not always fire. Sometimes it is architecture. Within the first 90 days, the Howin Foundation had already funded 117 women's micro-startups, 43 online coding scholarships, 21 therapy grants for workplace trauma, and purchased 3 failing small businesses, placing former housekeepers as equity partners. Sarah didn't raise capital. She seeded capital. Because wealth multiplies faster when no one hoards it. And the world finally saw what she had always been. Not a maid, a builder, a strategist, a generational architect. 1 year later, Sarah hosted her first conference. No ball gowns, no gold-trimmed nonsense, no billionaire flex. Just rows of women sitting shoulder to shoulder, some wearing uniforms, some wearing hijabs, some in worn jeans, some in business suits they bought secondhand, some with babies, some with scars, all with fire. Sarah stepped to the microphone. No teleprompter, no corporate jargon. Her voice was soft, controlled, but filled with thunder that came from every night. She cried into bleached bottles. "Today," she said, "we reclaim the truth that quiet women are not weak. Quiet women are simply gathering power, one breath at a time." Women in the crowd nodded, some wiping tears. Sarah continued, "For years, I scrubbed marble floors in a home that was built with money I helped generate, silently. And they thought they erased me by ignoring me. But they didn't erase me." She paused. "They sharpened me." The room inhaled collectively, like an army aligning spines. Sarah ended with a line so quiet, yet so lethal, it would become the tagline of the movement itself. "Ladies, power is not loud. Power is patient." Applause didn't break immediately. Everyone needed one breath to process it. And then the roar began. Not polite applause. Not claps. Roar. A roar from the lungs of women who finally saw a mirror. A roar from the throats that were tired of swallowing pain. And in that moment, the world didn't just hear Sarah. It felt her. She had turned her silence into an inheritance, not for herself, but for every woman who ever scrubbed someone else's floor while dreaming her own empire. Now here's where we end, not with Sarah's victory, but with your part in this movement, because the story isn't finished. It begins with the women watching. It begins with the voices that were once ignored. Speaking up, it begins with you. If this story touched something inside you, comment your thoughts below. Tell us where you're watching from right now, your city, your country. Let your voice be seen. And if you want more stories like this, powerful, dramatic, life-changing billionaire chronicles, subscribe to Billionaires Enclave and turn on notifications, because the next chapter we drop might be the one you needed for your breakthrough.